finally put a metal cage. So now when you go there, there's a cage holding you back, and people still try to kind of reach in. Thankfully, it's beyond your long arms. And going on there, and it suddenly hits you that when you read in the scriptures, oh, he is not here, but he is risen, and then you walk in there, and you recognize something. Israel as a nation is a secular nation. Don't let anybody tell you that Israel is a holy country. It isn't. It's a secular nation with a secular government, but even they cannot ignore the fact that you have these graves, you have this cave, and there's not a thing you can do about it except confess the fact that whoever was put in there is not in there. And the Romans made sure that they recorded that. The enemies of Jesus wrote that, and they all agreed that that morning when the women went, it was empty. But I want to talk to you today about the passage that we read. And it's so easy to get lost in the details. The crucifixion that took place on Friday or Thursday, depending on whose book you read. We know he said he will be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, so yes, it makes sense that it would have been on Thursday evening, but that's just theologians arguing. But they had this whole thing about Jesus predicting his death. Peter and the disciples and the others had heard Jesus preach, and they had tried to convince him, no, there has to be an easier way. We will die with you. And he was saying, no, I have to go through in that direction. And that night, that evening, after his meal with the disciples, after being betrayed by Judas, early the following morning, which would then have been Friday, they arrest him. They take him to Pontius Pilate, and around noon, they crucify him. It is very easy just to go past that word. They crucified him and just walk away from it because we don't want to deal with the blood and the gore. And if you go to that place, the place they call Golgotha, or the place of the skull, it is not a beautiful place, okay? It was the old garbage heap of the city. From there, you can see the Kidron Valley where they would burn all these dead bones. But the place where they would crucify the criminals, that's where they were calling Golgotha. When you go and see it, you realize it wasn't a beautiful place. In fact, it was a smelly place. It's a place where they would crucify the criminals. So yes, there's a lot of smell. It stinks. When somebody is being crucified, those who have described the whole procedure, when your hands are, of course, stretched out, you are forced to push up your diaphragm so that you can breathe. And after some time, because you're not able to take a full breath, you're taking this short breath, just doing this, because you cannot take a full amount of air in your lungs, so you slowly begin to drown in your own fluid. And they're actually watching you. Crucifixion had been created to exact maximum damage on the system and not kill you. They had calculated that a good crucifier could crucify you and you'll be there for at least 3 days. You elongate, you extend the suffering so that when somebody is out there, it's evident, it's a warning to everybody that you don't mess with Rome. So here is Jesus. The disciples have actually seen him there, and you can only do so much. You can't watch. You walk away. And by the time they were done, you can look at the stories that have been written, that when they came in, there is this man who is having to struggle for every breath. David the king had foreseen that years ago, and he wrote in the scriptures how this one is being crucified Isaiah had written that his back had been so ripped apart by this whip they call the cat of nine tails, that as it would hit you, it has hooks, and as it's being pulled back, it will tear down your back so that what you are watching is just raw flesh. So all the disciples had seen that. And so when we pick up this story and we talk about the crucifixion, it wasn't just, oh, they shot him and he died. It wasn't like, they hanged him and he died. We shoot you, you are dead in usually a little under 30 seconds. If you hang somebody, maximum 2 or 3 minutes, they're done, they're gone. Crucifixion was programmed to extend your life for up to 3 days so that you are dead, dying inch by inch. And this is what Peter tells us. But today I want to look at this from Peter's perspective, because sometimes it is easy to get lost in the details. I had thought of dressing as Peter, and then I thought, no, I'm going to get in trouble by being accused of cultural appropriation. So I want to talk to you today about Peter. Why? Because in Mark chapter 16, after all the history, after Peter's warning by Jesus, you're going to deny me, and Peter saying, no, I'm going to die with you, and he brought his sword, and he was going to be there, and then Christ is arrested, and he takes off. It's the women who go to report that Christ is risen. The men want nothing to do with that. But Jesus talked to them. Mark 16. Verse 6, and he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee, and there you will see him. Go and tell his disciples and Peter. Go tell his disciples and Peter. Why? Because Peter had already canceled himself out of this whole thing. Peter had denied. Peter had fallen. Peter was done. In fact, John says, Peter had said, I'm going back fishing. This whole Christian thing ain't working for me. I sat there. I thought he would come down from the cross and at least be like the Messiah we wanted. I had seen him die. I am done. And now Jesus is risen, and he is telling them, go tell the disciples, and make sure you tell who? Peter. Tell Peter. It's a specific, suffocating silence that follows profound personal failure. It is a weight of realizing that in a moment of ultimate pressure, you are not the person you claimed to be. And sometimes you fear that a single act of cowardice, a public denial of your values, or the betrayal of a friend is permanent disqualification from your purpose, and God is done with you. Let me give you 3 lessons in failure as a template for future success, and see if I can convince you that perhaps when we give each other our testimonies, that our testimony should be about our failures, not about our successes. We are very good about sharing our successes because they make us look good. Perhaps we got this whole thing backwards. Perhaps Peter can walk us through what is happening here. So 3 lessons in failure as a template for future services. Number 1, success is built on a personal call, not potential. I have a confession to make. My name is Shimon Bar Jonah, but you might know me as Peter. I was the one who was supposed to be the rock, yet I was the one who crumbled. I stood by while they beat up my friend, and I did not even speak up. I swore I didn't know him. In that moment, I went from being a hand-picked leader to a man weeping in the night, certain that my story was over. But looking back, my collapse was not the end, but the beginning of a deeper blueprint for God's plan for my life. In the world I grew up, The path to leadership was narrow and elite. The great rabbis like Gamaliel and Shammai chose only the best, most polished students for their academies. They wanted the proven. But Jesus does something radical. He bypassed the institutions and came to the edge of a lake in my backwater town, a little place called Capernaum, a place where people only stop by for food on their way to a better place. Maybe Modesto, California, or something like that. I don't know. The irony of my appointment still feels crazy to me. I was a fisherman from a sleepy town, yet he chose me and asked me to lead a team that included educated men like Matthew, businessmen like Judas, and a seminary student named Levi, and even wealthy John. Looking back, I can see the jarring nature of that choice. Why would a rabbi trust a fisherman to be the head of a ministry? Jesus even changed my name, like all good rabbis who take a student and they change their name. So even Moses took a young man called Hoshea bin Nun and gave him a man's name, called him Joshua, because he wanted him to be a fighter for the kingdom. So Jesus took me, Shimon ben Yonah, and he called me Cephas, Petra, the rock. Not because of who I was, but because of who he knew I would become, if only. He knew that I was a coward, and he dared to trust me with his teachings. He looked through my impulsivity and my tendency to speak before thinking. He granted me a new identity before I had earned it, proving that leadership is not about perfect degree, but about the calling that the master sees even when the apprentice is still a man from a backwater town called Capernaum. Let's talk about the radical courage of the weak and the silence of the powerful. You see, when the crisis finally arrived, everybody was in place. Those whom we expected to stand firm, powerful figures like Gamaliel, Joseph of Arimathea, and Nicodemus, they chose the way of safety. Even the male inner circle, my brothers, James, Jude, and John, the cousins, were nowhere to be found. In their place stood women. The girls showed up. They always do, don't they? Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and others. You see, there was a logical layer to their courage. As women in Rome of the day, they could not be arrested. So they could risk proximity that we men were afraid of. While we stayed away, terrified of being associated with a jailbird or publicly shamed, these women held vigil. They could not do much, but their presence reminded Jesus that he still had friends on earth. You see, his friends, by default, disproved their own friendship. They could never even later look at Jesus in the face and say, "We are your friends." Because the moment that he needed them, us needed me, I walked away. I ran away. And they crucified him. I don't want to talk about it. What I saw, I can't unsee. What I heard, I cannot unhear. What I smelt, I can't unsmell. I felt like such a loser. After the crucifixion, I was done. I was done with Jerusalem. And my plan was to go back to Galilee, shave my beard, change my name, disappear, get into a new trade where no one knew my face. I had been defeated by the words of a servant girl. I believed I had forfeited my right to ever being called a disciple again, ever to be called a believer again. I had failed and failed spectacularly. I was no longer Cephas or Peter. I was going to go back to my old name, Shimon ben Yonah. But Jesus. When he spoke to the girls, he told them, Go tell the disciples to move from Jerusalem. Go up north to Galilee. I will meet you there. Tell Peter I'm going to his old hometown. He could have said, tell Shimon ben Jonah, because I was no longer worthy of Peter. I was no longer worthy of Cephas. But he says, go tell Peter, because he is still saying, I still see you. I still got you. I still want you. I had been defeated by the words of a servant girl. 3 times I denied I knew him. I even swore under oath that I did not know him. I believed I had forfeited my right to be called Peter anymore. But he called me Peter again. The restoration began with a scene with startling calm. When we heard that the tomb was empty, John and I ran. Halfway there, we lost all dignity and took off sprinting in a panic. When I looked inside, I saw a detail that stopped my heart. The face cloth was neatly folded on the side. He had not left in a hurry. That calmness, that same inappropriate peace that he always seems to have during his arrest, it was a peace that stood in contrast to my undignified panic. The bridge back to my life did not come through a general announcement. It came through a personal, specific inclusion. Go tell the disciples and tell Peter. The God of second chances and more chances as we fail, and we fail, and we fail, and we think even God cannot use a third hand, third reader. I have failed. At what time does God say, okay, we are done? That mention of Peter was necessary because I had removed myself from the group. Jesus brought me back together specifically that my testimony might be one of joy, not of shame. He saw the failure coming. He warned me it would happen, prepared me for my return, and after I failed, he said, I got you. Do you hear the echo of the second chance? A journey for a backwater town fisherman to a fallen apprentice, and finally to a restored leader, teaches me, reminds me that no failure is final. Restoration is not about pretending that the denial never happened. It's about the master looking through my cowardice and calling me back by name anyway. When I look at the depth of my betrayal and the height of grace I received, I am forced to wonder about anyone else who feels disqualified by their moments of silence. As we reflect on our own cowardice, we are left to wrestle with the question I had to answer. So is your sin worse than that of Peter? Is your sense of failure greater than Peter's? See, failure is your greatest credential to your need for grace. For it is the sick who need a doctor, not the healthy. It is those who are needy who alone can appreciate the offer of grace. Your greatest credential is your failure, because in your failure you can come to God and say, nothing in my hands I bring, safely to the cross I cling, naked come to thee for dress, rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. I come before you naked, I need to be clothed. I have failed, I need to be restored. I have denied Jesus in my office by the work I do when I should have stood upright for truth, and I dared not speak because my job was on the line. I have denied when I knew the right thing to do. And I found myself like Peter, sitting in a corner somewhere weeping and crying and saying, "Why do I always do this?" Your failure allows you to tell the story of how you were rescued, restored, and rebuilt, proving that no one is beyond the reach of the risen Christ. And he says to them, "Now go, because you have heard me." And I, Peter, could once more stand upright and straight. I could look at the other disciples in the eye, because the master, you see, the teacher himself, the rabbi, called me by name. And he said to me, Peter, 3 times, you see, he said to me, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He used my old name to remind me who I was. And I said, "Lord, you know I love you." And he said, "Feed my sheep." "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And I said, "Yeah, Lord, I love you." And he said, "Tend to my flock." And the 3rd time he said, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And I finally said, "Yes, Lord, I love you." You see, in the language of the day, he's using a word that is hidden in the English language. Do you love me? He's using the word philos, from which you get the word Philadelphia. When you love somebody as a friend, he is saying, "Do you love me?" Agapeteo, do you love me? Do you love me without any resistance, without any, what do you call it? You are not leaving anything out for yourself. You are loving with everything. Do you love me? Like that, use the word agape. And Peter said, no. I phileo you. I love you as a brother. Twice. And then Jesus switches tracks and asked him, "So, Simon, do you love me as a brother?" Use the word phileo. And that's when Peter begins to cry and to weep, because he realized, I don't even love him like a brother, because he had asked him before, "Do you love me unconditionally?" The word he uses is agapeo. Agapeo means when you love somebody without any conditions whatsoever. When you are holding a 2-day-old baby that can do nothing for you, is functionally useless, is economically useless, but you love that baby with everything you got. That's an example of agapeo. And he says to him, "Do you love me?" Later, and Peter says, "I love you like a brother." Phileo, Philadelphia. And he finally says to him, "Do you love me?" And Peter recognizes, my failure is beyond friendship. And Jesus said to me, "Now you know that I am giving you your job back, not because you have earned it, but because grace is sufficient." Grace, God's grace, grace that will pardon and rescue. Within grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than, grace that is greater than all my sin. That's the message of Easter. That's really what we are out here. That's why we are here. If you don't get that Jesus says to Peter, "I am not calling you because you are righteous and holy and good and everything else. I am calling you because I want to save you and use your failure to speak to your people, so that you tell them not about your successes, not about what you have achieved or accomplished, but how you have failed and how the grace of God has brought you back." My name is Peter. I have given up my old name, Shimon Bar Jonah. I am no longer Shimon, the one who hears and follows. I am Peter, the rock, because he has made me the rock.